At Chicago's most luxurious hotel, 22-year-old Naomi Carter thought she was simply serving another VIP guest until a world-famous actress's million-dollar diamond necklace was exposed as fake in front of flashing cameras. The hotel was sealed, panic spread, and every eye turned to Naomi, the young black housekeeper with debt, a sick mother, and a struggling family. But Naomi was never the thief. She was chosen as the perfect sacrifice in a trap built on power, fear, and prejudice, until one lawyer saw the truth behind her forced confession. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Chicago woke beneath a cold silver sky, the kind that made the glass towers downtown look sharper than usual. A restless wind moved off the lake and rushed through the streets around the Magnificent Mile, where luxury cars lined up outside the Grand Crescent Hotel, and camera crews were already gathering before sunrise. Naomi Carter arrived through the staff entrance with her shoulders pulled tight against the morning chill, and her housekeeping shoes still damp from a puddle she had stepped in near the bus stop. At 22, Naomi was younger than most of the women on her floor, and life had already carved a quiet seriousness into her face. She was a slim black woman of medium height with deep brown skin, soft watchful eyes, and tightly coiled black hair pinned into a neat low bun beneath her housekeeping cap. There was nothing flashy about her. Even her beauty was the kind people noticed only if they slowed down long enough to look properly. An oval face, full lips, and a calm expression that made her seem older than she was. Naomi had once been talkative as a girl, the kind who laughed with her whole body and sang while helping her mother wash dishes. But hardship had trained silence into her. Hospital bills, overdue rent notices, and nights spent counting dollars at the kitchen table had made her careful with hope. She had learned that when life kept taking, it was safer not to expect much. Inside, the Grand Crescent looked less like a hotel than a private kingdom. The marble floors reflected the chandeliers above like still water. Fresh white lilies stood in gold-trimmed arrangements taller than some children. The air smelled faintly of polished wood, expensive perfume, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Naomi paused only a second before clocking in, but even that second reminded her how far this world was from the apartment where her family lived on the south side. Naomi. She turned at once. She turned at Claire Whitmore, the hotel's executive manager, was walking toward her in a fitted cream blazer and narrow heels that clicked like little warnings across the floor. Claire was 48, tall and slim, with pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and ash-blonde hair swept into a perfect knot that never seemed to move. Her gray-blue eyes were cool and alert. She carried herself with the effortless precision of a woman who had spent years mastering luxury spaces and the people inside them. Claire was always polite in public, never loud, never openly cruel, but beneath that polished calm lived a hard instinct for control. She valued order, image, and reputation above comfort, truth, or kindness. "Today is not a day for mistakes," Claire said. Her tone was smooth, but it left no room for misunderstanding. "We have a high-profile arrival, very high profile. You'll be on the Sterling Suite." Naomi blinked. "Me?" Claire looked her over, as if measuring whether surprise itself was professional. "Yes, Miss Sterling requested minimal staff traffic and discreet service. You're quiet, efficient. Use that." She handed Naomi a gold-edged folder. "Everything you need is in there. The suite must remain flawless." Naomi took the folder with both hands. "Yes, ma'am." Claire's gaze lingered for a moment. "And Naomi, no phones, no delays, no conversation unless spoken to. The press is already circling like birds outside. We are not giving them anything." As Claire moved away, Naomi felt a small knot tighten in her stomach. Serving the top-floor VIP suite meant extra pressure, but it also meant a small bonus if the guest left a good service review. Small bonuses mattered. Small bonuses bought inhalers, groceries, and sometimes enough time to keep bad news from getting worse. In the employee locker room, Mia Reynolds was pinning on her front desk name tag with one hand while holding a lipstick tube in the other. Mia was 26, white, petite, and quick-moving, with auburn hair curled loosely over her shoulders and bright hazel eyes that missed very little. She had the lively surface of someone who belonged naturally in hospitality, always smiling, always ready with a polished greeting. But under that brightness was a nervous intelligence. Mia had grown up in a family that moved from one cheap rental to another, and ambition had taught her to study people closely. "You got sterling?" Mia whispered, half impressed, half alarmed. Naomi nodded. Mia let out a low breath. "Lucky you, or not. Depends how famous people act before coffee." Naomi smiled faintly. "I'll take lucky." Mia lowered her voice. "The lobby's already a zoo. Reporters, bloggers, stylists, security people, jewelry reps. Whole place feels like it's holding its breath." That image stayed with Naomi as she stepped into the service elevator. Holding its breath, that was exactly right. By late morning, the hotel had transformed. Outside, barricades had been set up to manage the crowd. Through the tall lobby windows, Naomi could see camera flashes glittering in the gray daylight, and hear the muffled roar that rose every time a black SUV pulled near the entrance. Men in dark suits spoke into earpieces. Florists replaced arrangements that were already perfect. Someone from events was crying quietly near the ballroom doors because the lighting angles for the display stage had been changed again. On the 34th floor, Naomi entered the Sterling suite for the first time. It was larger than her family's apartment. The sitting room held velvet chairs in pale blue, a grand piano no one likely touched, and windows that framed the city in a sweep of steel and cloud. A dining table stood set with crystal water glasses, silver flatware, and a vase of orchids so fresh they still looked cool with morning mist. In the bedroom beyond, garment bags had already been delivered, along with luxury makeup cases and shoeboxes stacked like miniature monuments to wealth. Naomi began working quietly, changing towels, checking the espresso station, steaming the crease from a curtain panel, straightening things that already looked straight. While she worked, her mind kept wandering home. Her mother, Evelyn Carter, would be sitting by the apartment window by now, pretending to rest. Evelyn was 59, but looked older because illness had thinned her body and hollowed her cheeks. She was a dark-skinned woman with silver threading through short curls and gentle eyes that had survived disappointment without turning bitter. Years earlier, after Naomi's father disappeared from their lives, Evelyn had worked double shifts in a nursing home until her heart began failing her. Since then, she had developed the habit of minimizing pain. She smiled through dizziness, called chest tightness just tiredness, and hid prescriptions under folded dish towels so Naomi would not see what they cost. Naomi checked her phone during a short break and found a message from Marcus. No luck yet. 2 places said they'd call. "Don't worry. I'll keep trying." Marcus Carter, Naomi's husband, was 27, lean and broad-shouldered, with warm brown skin, a thoughtful face, and close-cropped hair that had begun to look uneven because he cut it himself to save money. Before losing his warehouse job 6 months earlier, he had been steady, joking, easy with the children. Unemployment had not made him cruel, but it had bruised something inside him. Shame had a way of stealing volume from a man. Now he spoke more softly, apologized for things that were not his fault, and came home with rejection folded into his posture. Naomi typed back quickly, "It's okay, keep going, I'll be late tonight." Big event. A second message came from her mother almost immediately. "Don't worry about me, I'm feeling strong today." Naomi stared at that one a moment longer because whenever Evelyn said she felt strong, it usually meant the opposite. Just after noon, the star arrived. The hallway filled first with movement. Security, hotel staff, assistants, garment handlers, then settled into a tense stillness as Victoria Sterling stepped out of the elevator. Naomi had seen Victoria in magazines, on billboards, in perfume ads 10 feet tall, but fame flattened people into surfaces. In person, Victoria Sterling looked more human and somehow more striking. She was 41, white, tall, and elegantly built, with golden blonde hair swept back from a face the camera loved for good reason. Fine features, light blue eyes, and a poise that could have turned cold in another person. Yet there was warmth in the way she looked at people directly when they spoke. The public often painted her as distant and impossible because she guarded her private life fiercely, but that reserve had grown from years of betrayal by tabloids, agents, and lovers who sold parts of her life for attention. Her caution was armor, not arrogance. One of her assistants was speaking rapidly about schedules when Victoria noticed Naomi holding the door. "Thank you," Victoria said. It was simple, but stars were not required to say thank you to invisible workers. Naomi stepped aside. "Welcome, Miss Sterling." Victoria's eyes moved briefly over Naomi's name tag. "Naomi. Thank you, Naomi." That small moment stayed with her longer than it should have. The rest of the afternoon passed in sharp, expensive fragments. Ethan Cole from Aurelia Diamonds arrived to coordinate the next day's private preview. Ethan was 35, well-groomed and handsome in the deliberate way of men trained for media appearances. Dark hair, measured smile, polished shoes, and a voice that always sounded ready for a microphone. Naomi saw him only briefly, but she heard enough to understand the scale of what was coming. The diamond set Victoria would wear was rumored to be worth tens of millions. More than jewelry, it was a campaign, a spectacle, a headline waiting to happen. Outside, media pressure kept building. From a service corridor window, Naomi could see satellite vans parked along the curb and reporters filming stand-ups against the hotel entrance. The event had already become bigger than a necklace. It was celebrity, money, glamour, status, all the things that drew crowds before a single truth had even occurred. By evening, Naomi's feet ached and the muscles in her lower back pulsed with fatigue. She was carrying fresh towels toward the service hall that led past the exhibition ballroom when she noticed something strange. 4 men in dark technical uniforms were moving a black case on a wheeled cart toward the secure display area. At first glance, they looked ordinary enough. Badges, gloves, work belts, clipped movements, but something about them felt wrong. 2 were too broad and stiff to seem like hotel tech staff. One kept glancing over his shoulder, another wore a cap too low over his face, and the case they pushed was unlike the ordinary equipment containers Naomi had seen all week. It was sleek, heavy-looking, and fitted with a biometric lock panel that glowed faint blue in the dim corridor light. Naomi slowed without meaning to. One of the men looked up sharply. His face was narrow, his expression unreadable. "Staff routes closed," he said. Naomi held up the towels a little, as though proof of innocence mattered. "I'm just going to linen." He gave a short nod, but his eyes stayed on her until she moved on. When she reached the corner, she glanced back. The men had already disappeared through the ballroom access doors. Naomi stood still for a moment, listening. She could hear only the hum of the hotel ventilation and the distant rise of voices from the lobby below. Maybe it was nothing. Probably it was nothing. High-profile events used specialized security equipment all the time. Yet a strange unease traveled up her spine. Then her phone buzzed again. A missed call from home. And just like that, the ballroom, the case, the unfamiliar men, all of it was pushed aside by the heavier fear she carried every day. She called back at once, but no one answered. For one long second, Naomi looked toward the locked exhibition doors. Then she turned and hurried toward the service elevator with the image of that biometric case still burning quietly in her mind. Morning arrived over Chicago in a pale wash of gray light, the city still wrapped in the chill left behind by the lake wind. By 8 o'clock, the Grand Crescent Hotel no longer felt like a hotel at all. It had become a stage. Naomi Carter stepped out of the employee elevator carrying a tray of herbal tea, sparkling water, and sliced fruit for the Sterling suite. But the calm discipline she had trained into herself was harder to hold this morning. The image of the black biometric case from the night before had followed her into sleep and haunted the little fragments of rest she managed between her children's shifting in bed and her mother's coughing in the next room. She had told herself it was security equipment, nothing more. Yet something about the guarded way those unfamiliar technicians had looked at her kept scraping against her thoughts. The 34th floor was already alive with controlled chaos. Stylists moved in and out of the suite carrying garment bags. A makeup artist with platinum hair and sharp eyebrows hurried past Naomi while muttering into a headset. 2 members of private security stood outside the double doors, broader and more intimidating than the hotel's usual staff. Their dark suits were cut to hide weapons, and their faces carried the blank expression of men paid to notice everything. Inside, Victoria Sterling was preparing for the private press reveal. Victoria stood before the floor-length mirror in a silk robe the color of champagne, her blonde hair pinned halfway up, while a stylist adjusted the rest into loose waves that would frame her face under the cameras. Even in preparation, she carried the same graceful composure Naomi had noticed the day before. But this morning, there was a new edge beneath it, a focus sharpened by the knowledge that in a few minutes, every photograph taken of her would circle the country before lunch. "Good morning, Naomi," Victoria said as Naomi set down the tray. The fact that she remembered her name again surprised Naomi. "Good morning, Miss Sterling." Victoria smiled faintly. "I hope the city is being kind to you today." Naomi almost answered honestly that Chicago had never once been kind enough to stop asking for money she didn't have, but instead she said, "Yes, ma'am." At the far side of the suite, Ethan Cole was reviewing the event order with a jewelry representative. In daylight, he looked even more polished than the day before. Dark, tailored suit, clean jawline, carefully measured confidence. Yet Naomi noticed a tension in the way he checked his watch twice in the space of a minute. For all his media charm, Ethan was a man who feared failure more than embarrassment. Years earlier, one disastrous luxury launch had nearly ended his career, and ever since then he had developed a perfectionist streak that bordered on obsession. By 9:30, the ballroom had transformed into spectacle. The exhibition hall shimmered beneath a suspended crystal lighting that made every glass surface sparkle. Rows of white floral arrangements framed the central stage, where a velvet pedestal waited beneath a transparent security dome. Hundreds of invited reporters, influencers, luxury buyers, and photographers filled the room, their whispers blending into a low electric hum. Outside the main entrance, even more press had gathered behind velvet ropes, desperate for a glimpse of Victoria and the legendary Aurelia diamond set. Naomi stood near the side service corridor with several other staff members, instructed to remain invisible unless called. From there, she could see Claire Whitmore near the stage, every detail of her cream suit immaculate, her expression composed and unreadable. Claire's voice stayed low as she directed security positions and adjusted the timing with the event producer. To everyone watching, she looked like the perfect hotel executive, calm under pressure, efficient, flawless. But Naomi could not forget the strange unease she had felt after seeing those unfamiliar technicians the previous night. The music lowered. The room darkened. Then Victoria stepped onto the stage. A wave of applause rippled through the ballroom as the actress appeared in a silver evening gown that caught the light like moonlit water. The room belonged to her instantly. Every camera rose, Ethan approached the pedestal with ceremonial care. A staff member entered a code, and the transparent dome lifted with a soft hydraulic hiss. Inside, resting against black velvet, was the Aurelia diamond necklace. Even from Naomi's distant position, it looked impossible. Dozens of flawless stones curved in an elegant collar design, each one sharp with white fire. It was the kind of jewelry that seemed less like decoration and more like authority, the sort of thing meant to signal status, legacy, untouchable wealth. Ethan lifted it carefully. "Today," he announced, his polished voice amplified through the ballroom, "Aurelia Diamonds proudly welcomes Victoria Sterling as the face of timeless brilliance." Ooh. He stepped behind Victoria and fastened the necklace around her throat. For one breathless second, the room exploded in camera flashes. Then Ethan froze. At first, Naomi thought it was simply the drama of the reveal, another practiced pause for the press, but something in his face changed. His eyes narrowed. He leaned closer to the necklace, the public smile draining from his expression. The diamonds were reflecting light wrong. Instead of the cold, razor-clean brilliance expected from stones of that caliber, The surface gave off a flatter, duller glimmer. To most people, it was still dazzling, but Ethan had spent a decade building campaigns around gemstones worth fortunes. He knew the language of light. This was not the original necklace. For a second, the ballroom remained suspended in confusion. Then Ethan's voice came out low and strained. "This is not the Aurelia piece." The words landed like shattered glass. Gasps spread through the crowd. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes intensified as if panic itself made the scene more valuable. Victoria instinctively touched the necklace at her throat, her blue eyes sharpening with disbelief. "What do you mean?" she asked. Ethan stepped back, visibly pale now. "It's a replica." The ballroom erupted. Security flooded the aisles. Guests stood from their seats, shouting over one another. Some tried to rush toward exits, only to find hotel officers already sealing the doors. Within moments, the Grand Crescent's luxury glamour transformed into something claustrophobic and dangerous. Claire's voice cut through the room, cold and commanding. "No one leaves the hotel. Lock all service elevators. Secure every guest floor." The words spread quickly. No one in, no one out. Naomi felt her stomach drop. The next hour blurred into controlled panic. Every staff member was ordered into holding zones for questioning. Phones were temporarily confiscated from employees. Security teams swept guest floors, storage areas, loading docks, and the exhibition hall. Naomi was escorted to a conference room on the 12th floor where several hotel employees sat in frightened silence. A detective from Chicago PD soon entered. Detective Samuel Ross was a broad-shouldered black man in his mid-40s with tired eyes and a face shaped by years of long cases and public pressure. He wore his authority quietly, not with intimidation, but with a habit of listening harder than most people spoke. Yet today, even he carried the sharpened impatience of a case already attracting national attention. He began questioning staff one by one. When it was Naomi's turn, the questions changed tone. "You serviced Miss Sterling Suite last night?" "Yes." "You were the last hotel employee confirmed inside before private security took over?" Naomi hesitated. "I believe so." Ross glanced at the file in front of him. "You left the 34th floor corridor at 9:42 p.m., but camera footage for the next 15 minutes is missing." Naomi stared at him. "Missing?" Ross's expression stayed neutral. "That's what I said." Her pulse began to pound in her ears. The missing footage aligned exactly with the time she had seen the strange technicians moving the biometric case. Before she could explain, another investigator slid a printed financial report across the table. Medical debt, rent arrears, utility notices, Marcus's unemployment status. Naomi felt heat rise in her face. To them, her entire life had already become motive. By noon, the story had escaped the hotel. Across social media, headlines spread like wildfire. Black housekeeper linked to million-dollar jewel theft inside job at Chicago luxury hotel. Desperate staff member under investigation. In a cramped apartment miles away, Marcus Carter stared at the news alert glowing on his cracked phone screen. His face lost color. The room around him felt suddenly smaller. The unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the medicine beside Evelyn's teacup, Liam's toy car abandoned near the couch. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Naomi wouldn't." But even as he said it, fear moved through him. Not doubt in her innocence. Never that. Fear of what happened to people like them when money and power needed someone easy to blame. Back inside the hotel, Mia Reynolds stood frozen near the reception desk as the lockdown tightened. Then memory struck her. Late the previous night, while updating guest folios, she had seen Claire Whitmore stepping out of the VIP elevator alone. It had been close to midnight, too late for routine management checks. Claire had been holding something slim and metallic in one hand, possibly a keycard override device. At the time, Mia had dismissed it. Now, her stomach tightened. Across the secured suite floor, Victoria sat in stunned silence while stylists and publicists argued around her. Her fingers touched the fake diamonds still resting on the vanity table. Her expression had changed. This was no random theft. Someone inside the hotel had made this possible. And for the first time, Victoria's gaze drifted toward the management staff outside her suite doors. Toward Claire. Toward the polished machine that had promised perfection. Toward the possibility that the danger had been inside the Grand Crescent all along. The Grand Crescent no longer felt like a palace of glass and marble. By late afternoon, it had become a sealed machine of fear. Security officers moved through the corridors with clipped footsteps. Guest complaints echoed from locked suites, and the once elegant lobby now carried the low hum of panic disguised as professionalism. Naomi Carter had been moved twice since the questioning began. First to a holding conference room, then to a smaller office near the surveillance wing on the 17th floor. Every relocation made her feel less like an employee and more like something already processed. By the time the door finally opened again, exhaustion had settled into her bones. Claire Whitmore stepped inside alone. She closed the door gently behind her, and that softness was somehow more unsettling than anger. In the colder, fluorescent light of the surveillance office, Claire looked as immaculate as ever. Her cream blazer had been replaced by a charcoal gray suit, severe and elegant, the kind worn by women who understood how power worked in closed rooms. Her ash-blonde hair remained pinned perfectly in place, and her pale face carried the same calm control Naomi had seen since the beginning. But here, away from the lobby and cameras, the polish around her eyes seemed thinner. Claire was not rattled. She was calculating. The room itself was small and windowless, lit by the glow of inactive monitor screens mounted across one wall. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee, metal, and the residual heat of electronics. A single chair sat opposite Naomi. Claire chose not to sit immediately. Instead, she stood near the table and studied Naomi in silence for a moment, as if allowing the younger woman's fear to ripen. "You look tired," Claire said at last. Naomi said nothing. Claire lowered herself gracefully into the chair opposite her. "I spoke to the investigators." Naomi's fingers tightened in her lap. Claire's tone softened, almost maternal now. "They have enough to make this ugly. Missing footage, financial distress. You were the last confirmed employee near Miss Sterling's suite." She let the words settle before continuing. "And when the press gets hold of desperation, Naomi, they never let go." The mention of desperation felt like a blade precisely aimed. Claire knew. Of course she knew. Hospital debt, rent overdue, Marcus's unemployment. Every weakness in Naomi's life had likely been sitting in a management file long before the diamonds disappeared. Naomi swallowed. "I didn't do this." Claire tilted her head slightly, her expression sympathetic in a way that felt rehearsed. "I know you didn't plan the theft." The wording caught Naomi immediately. Not, "you didn't do it, you didn't plan it." Claire leaned forward, folding her hands with elegant patience. "Listen carefully, this can still be contained." Contained, as if Naomi's life were simply a problem of optics. Claire's voice dropped lower, intimate enough to sound like mercy. "All they need is a believable explanation. Someone under pressure, someone who made a terrible decision because life gave her no choice." Naomi's pulse began to pound. Claire continued smooth and unhurried. "You say you helped the thieves because you needed money. Nothing elaborate. Just that you let someone in or shared access information. You never touched the necklace yourself." Naomi stared at her. Claire held her gaze without blinking. "Why would I say that?" Naomi whispered. For the first time, Claire's mask shifted into something colder beneath the surface kindness. "Because your family needs saving." The room seemed to tighten. Claire began listing promises with terrifying precision. "Your mother's hospital balance will be erased." Naomi's breath caught. "Marcus will be placed in a management position with one of our security contractors. Immediate hire." Her throat tightened. "Your children will receive full tuition support through St. Agnes Academy. Better schools, better future." Claire's tone never rose. She spoke the way a banker might explain favorable terms. Then she delivered the final cut. All you have to do is carry the story. Silence swallowed the room. Naomi thought of Evelyn sitting upright in the apartment chair, pretending her chest pain was nothing. She thought of Marcus returning home with another rejection hidden behind tired eyes. She thought of Liam and Ava sleeping close together because the heating bill had forced them to shut off the second bedroom. And suddenly, Claire's offer no longer sounded like a lie, it sounded like escape. Across the city, Marcus Carter sat in the kitchen under the weak yellow light above the sink, staring at a pharmacy receipt that might as well have been written in another language. The medicine Evelyn needed had increased in price again, and the samples from the free clinic had run out 2 days earlier. Marcus was 27, but stress had deepened the lines at the corners of his eyes in the past 6 months. Tonight he looked older still. He held his phone in one hand, thumb hovering over a number he had promised himself never to call again. Darnell Hayes, a neighborhood lender whose money came fast and left scars. Darnell was a heavy-set black man in his early 40s with a shaved head, gold rings, and a smile too relaxed for the kind of business he ran. Years earlier, he had done a short prison sentence for predatory lending and extortion. But men like Darnell always seemed to return to the same corners with cleaner shoes and darker terms. Marcus closed his eyes and made the call. He hated himself before the first ring ended. In the bedroom nearby, little Ava Carter sat cross-legged on the blanket, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear hanging loose. At 4 years old, she had Naomi's wide dark eyes and Marcus's thoughtful stillness. She looked toward the doorway when her grandmother coughed. "Daddy?" she asked softly. Marcus turned. "Is Mommy coming home tonight?" The question broke something in the room. He forced himself to kneel in front of her, managing a smile that hurt to hold. "Mommy's still working, baby." Ava nodded, trusting him the way children trust gravity. Back at the hotel, Naomi sat motionless as Claire slid a prepared statement across the table. The typed confession was simple, devastating in its simplicity. I knowingly allowed unauthorized access to the exhibition security route in exchange for promised financial compensation. My debt and family hardship influenced my decision. The words blurred. Naomi's hands trembled. "I can't," she whispered. Claire's expression softened again, almost sorrowful. "You can, because you love them." The cruelty of that truth struck deeper than accusation ever could. Naomi closed her eyes. If she refused, what happened next? Charges anyway, a public trial, the family dragged through humiliation, no money, no medicine, no school, no rent. But if she signed, maybe the children would eat without fear, maybe Evelyn would breathe easier. Maybe Marcus would stop carrying shame home in his shoulders. A single tear slipped down Naomi's cheek, though she didn't seem to notice it. One person's suffering was better than 5. That was how poverty trained love to think. Outside the surveillance office, Mia Reynolds stood near the corridor junction pretending to organize guest transfer lists. Through the narrow glass strip built into the office door, she could see only silhouettes and gestures, but she saw enough. Claire leaned in close. Naomi's shoulders folded inward. A document changed hands. Mia's stomach tightened. The image brought back the memory of Claire on the VIP floor the night before, moving alone at an hour no manager needed to be there. At the time, it had felt odd. Now it felt dangerous. Inside Victoria Sterling's temporary holding suite, the actress sat near the window, while 2 publicists argued in hushed voices over damage control. Her hair had been redone twice for media appearances that never happened, but now loose, blonde strands framed a face gone sharper with suspicion. Her longtime assistant, Elise Monroe, entered quietly. Elise was a slim woman in her 30s with olive skin, dark cropped hair, and the steady efficiency of someone who had spent 10 years surviving celebrity crises without letting emotion leak into the room. She rarely speculated. But now, even she looked uneasy. "They say one of the housekeepers may confess," Elise said. Victoria turned sharply. "Already?" Elise nodded. "Management seems relieved." Victoria stared at the fake necklace still resting in its velvet case. Something about that speed felt wrong. Real guilt usually resisted. Fear confessed too fast. Her eyes narrowed. "Who's handling this internally?" Victoria asked. Elise hesitated. "Claire Whitmore." Victoria looked back toward the suite door, her expression cooling into thought. In the surveillance office, Naomi opened her eyes. The confession still waited in front of her. Her mother's medicine. Marcus's dignity. Her children's future. Against those images, her own freedom began to feel strangely small. With trembling fingers, Naomi reached for the pen. Claire watched in complete stillness. The signature took only seconds. But to Naomi, it felt like the sound of a door closing somewhere far away. When she finally set the pen down, the room became unbearably quiet. Claire took the paper, folded it neatly, and rose from her chair. "You did the right thing," she said. Naomi did not answer, because deep down, beneath the terror and the love and the sacrifice, another truth had begun to stir. Not certainty. Not yet. Just the faint, terrible feeling that she had stepped into something far larger than a confession. And as the surveillance office door opened, the hotel cameras in the corridor reflecting cold white light off the polished floor, Naomi Carter walked toward the investigators carrying a lie she had chosen for the people she loved. By the time Naomi Carter was escorted out of the Grand Crescent Hotel, night had already swallowed most of Chicago. Rain had begun to fall in a thin, cold mist, silver under the police lights that painted the hotel entrance in pulses of blue and red. Reporters crowded behind the barricades despite the late hour, microphones raised like weapons, camera flashes exploding against the dark glass doors, as if the city itself needed a villain before morning. Naomi stepped forward between two officers, wrists restrained in front of her, and for one disorienting moment, the world became nothing but light. Her housekeeping uniform had been replaced by a plain gray jacket thrown over her shoulders, but nothing could hide the tremor in her hands or the exhaustion etched into her young face. At 22, Naomi still carried the softness of someone who should have been allowed more years before life hardened her. Yet tonight, with rain dampening the loose strands around her tightly pinned hair and shame pressing down on her posture, she looked less like a criminal than a frightened daughter trying not to fall apart. The shouting began instantly. "Naomi, did you sell access to the thieves? Did debt drive you to betray the hotel? Was it worth millions?" She kept her eyes lowered, not because she felt guilt, because she could not survive seeing her own face reflected in their certainty. Inside the police vehicle, the city lights blurred against the rain-streaked windows as the car pulled away from downtown. Naomi's mind moved not toward the theft, nor even the confession she had signed, but toward the promises Claire had made in that sealed surveillance room. Her mother's hospital debt erased. Marcus employed. The children safe. If those things were already happening, then maybe this pain still had meaning. That thought was the only thing keeping her upright. The Chicago Police Department headquarters was colder than the hotel in every way. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Hallways smelled faintly of old paper, coffee, and wet coats. Doors opened and shut with institutional indifference. Naomi was led into interview room B, a square space with pale walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a mirrored observation panel that turned the far wall into a black surface reflecting only her outline. Hours seemed to pass without a clock. Then the questions began. Detective Samuel Ross returned, but this time he was joined by another investigator. Lieutenant Helen Pierce was a white woman in her early 50s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with short iron-gray hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Her voice carried the clipped precision of someone who had spent decades in interrogation rooms learning where fear hid in a sentence. Years earlier, a failed corruption case had nearly ended her career after the wrong suspect walked free, and since then, Helen had developed an intolerance for incomplete stories. She pushed hard, not because she enjoyed cruelty, but because she had long ago confused pressure with truth. She sat opposite Naomi and opened the file. "You confessed to facilitating access," Helen said. "Who approached you?" Naomi's throat tightened. No one. Helen's gaze sharpened. Then how did they know when the cameras would go dark? Naomi stared at the metal table. Ross leaned forward, quieter, more patient. Naomi, if there are others involved, this is your chance to protect yourself. The words almost made her laugh. Protect herself. That door had closed the moment she signed. She repeated the confession line exactly as written. I made a bad decision because my family needed money. Helen's jaw tightened. That's not enough. No one pulls off a swap like this alone. The next hours blurred into repetition. Names, routes, access points, imagined accomplices, security gaps. Every silence from Naomi became its own accusation. Every hesitation was treated as withheld information. The pressure was not physical, but it pressed all the same. Slow, relentless, psychological. They wanted more than a confession. They wanted a network. And Naomi had none to give. Across the mirrored wall, in the adjacent observation room, a man in a navy suit stood with his arms folded, reading the copied confession. Daniel Brooks. At 38, Daniel carried the kind of presence that entered a room before his voice did. He was a black attorney with a tall, athletic frame gone slightly leaner with age, close-trimmed beard, intelligent dark eyes, and the quiet confidence of a man who understood systems from the inside out. His suits were always impeccably tailored, but there was nothing flashy about him. Precision defined him, not vanity. Every word, every pause, every question he asked in court was chosen like a chess move. Tonight, his expression was unreadable. He reread the confession. Too neat. Too fast. Too perfectly aligned with motive. Years of civil rights litigation had trained him to recognize false narratives disguised as legal convenience. This one had all the fingerprints. Poverty as motive, media-ready optics, a signed statement that explained everything while revealing almost nothing. It was too perfect to be true. And perfection, Daniel knew, was often where the lies hid best. His certainty did not come only from experience. It came from memory. When Daniel was 11, his mother had been accused of stealing prescription medication from the nursing facility where she worked nights. She had been a single black mother, raising him in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit, exhausted but proud, and management had chosen her because she fit the story too easily. Overworked, behind on bills, raising a child alone. She lost the job before the real thief, a supervisor selling narcotics on the side, was exposed months later. The damage never fully left her. Neither had the lesson. The poor were easiest to shape into guilt. Daniel looked through the glass at Naomi, sitting rigid beneath the fluorescent light. Not a mastermind. A substitute prisoner. By morning, Chicago media had turned vicious. News panels replayed Naomi's escorted walk from the hotel in slow motion, her lowered eyes repackaged as a proof of shame. Social media feeds overflowed with outrage, cruelty, and moral performance. Luxury hotel worker steals from global star. Greed behind the Grand Crescent diamond scandal. How debt turned a housekeeper into a criminal. By breakfast, Naomi Carter had become something far larger than herself. A symbol, not of injustice, of greed. A woman the public could use to reassure themselves that poverty corrupted character. At the Grand Crescent, Victoria Sterling sat in the suite's private study while Elise Monroe worked quietly on a tablet nearby. Victoria's pale blue eyes moved across the coverage, her expression growing colder with each headline. "They're burying her before trial," she said. Elise nodded carefully. The hotel's legal team seemed satisfied. Victoria looked toward the skyline through the rain-streaked glass. Something about the entire progression still felt orchestrated. The speed of the confession, the convenience of the financial motive, Claire's almost visible relief. She turned back sharply. "Elise, find the best defense attorney in Chicago." Elise didn't ask why. That was one reason Victoria trusted her after 10 years of scandals, betrayals, and carefully managed storms. Elise's loyalty came from discipline, not curiosity. "There's one name everyone uses when the system smells wrong," Elise said. "Daniel Brooks." Victoria's gaze lingered. "Then make sure he sees the case." Back on the south side, Marcus Carter was discovering that promises made in private rooms rarely traveled beyond them. The knock at the apartment door came just after sunrise. Mr. Alvarez, the landlord, stood in the hallway with his coat still half-buttoned and irritation already settled into his face. He was a stocky Latino man in his 60s with weathered skin, tired eyes, and the practical hardness of someone who had spent too many years watching tenants' confused sympathy for policy. He was not cruel by nature, but missed payments had made him defensive over time. "Marcus," he said flatly, "you're 2 months behind." Marcus stepped into the doorway, trying to block the view of the apartment behind him. The medicine bottles, the sleeping children, Evelyn's blanket draped over the couch. "I just need a little more time." Mr. Alvarez sighed. "I've already given time." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My wife—" "I saw the news." The words hit harder than accusation. Mr. Alvarez's expression softened only slightly. "I'm sorry for what's happening, but sorry doesn't pay the mortgage." He handed Marcus a folded notice. 3 days, eviction warning. After the door closed, Marcus stood frozen in the narrow hallway of his own home, the paper trembling in his hand. At police headquarters, Daniel Brooks finally entered interview room B. Naomi looked up slowly. He introduced himself with calm simplicity. "I'm Daniel Brooks. I believe you need counsel." Naomi studied him in silence. There was kindness in his face, but more than that, there was something dangerous to people who built false stories. He looked like a man who noticed cracks. Daniel sat across from her and placed the copied confession on the table. "This statement explains too much and says nothing," he said quietly. "That usually means someone wrote the ending before the beginning." For the first time, Naomi's expression shifted. He leaned forward slightly. "You're not the person this story was built for. You are the person it was built around." Naomi's heart pounded, because some part of her had already feared the same thing. Daniel's voice lowered. "Let me help you." The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Naomi thought of Claire's promises, her mother's debt, Marcus's job, the children's future. If she took legal help now, would Claire still keep her word? What if this destroyed the only chance her family had? Slowly, painfully, Naomi shook her head. "No." Daniel did not move. She swallowed hard. "I made my choice." He held her gaze for several seconds, reading not guilt, but sacrifice. And in that moment, Daniel became even more certain. Someone had chosen her because love made people easier to trap than fear ever could. But Naomi lowered her eyes and repeated almost to herself this time, "I can't risk my family." Daniel rose slowly, the case file still in his hand. He understood now. This was not a confession born from crime. It was a confession born from hope. And hope, in the wrong hands, could be turned into a prison more effective than steel. Naomi remained alone at the metal table as the door shut behind him. Still believing Claire Whitmore was somewhere beyond these walls, keeping every promise she had made. The next morning, Chicago woke under a low ceiling of gray clouds, the kind that made every building look heavier than it really was. At police headquarters, Naomi Carter had stopped asking what time it was. Time inside the holding floor no longer moved in hours. It moved in fluorescent hums, the scrape of chairs, the opening and closing of steel doors, and the slow erosion of hope. She sat alone in a temporary interview room, hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the blank wall opposite her. The confession she had signed still lived like a stone inside her chest, but she kept returning to the same thought that had sustained her through the night. By now, Claire must have helped them. Her mother's medication, Marcus's job, the rent, the children's school. The promise had to be real, because if it wasn't, then her sacrifice had no meaning at all. The door opened. Daniel Brooks stepped inside carrying a leather case tucked beneath one arm and a phone in his hand. He looked as composed as ever in a charcoal suit and dark tie, but Naomi immediately noticed something had changed in his expression. The calm intelligence was still there, yet beneath it lay a sharper resolve, as if sometime between midnight and dawn the case had stopped being professional curiosity and become personal duty. He sat down across from her without opening the file. "I went to your home," he said. Naomi's breath caught. Daniel watched her carefully. "I needed to see whether the promises attached to your confession had reached the people you were trying to protect." For a moment, Naomi said nothing. Then, very quietly, "Did they?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, the story shifted backward to the South Side apartment he had visited only hours earlier. The building itself looked tired before anyone opened the door. Cracked paint curled from the hallway walls. The stairwell smelled faintly of damp plaster, old cooking oil, and winter coats that never fully dried. The kind of place where every tenant carried their life in grocery bags because furniture rarely survived the move. Marcus Carter had opened the door, looking as though sleep had become another luxury he could no longer afford. At 27, Marcus still had the frame of a man built for physical work. Broad shoulders, lean arms, steady posture, but the last few months had hollowed out his confidence. His warm brown eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and the unshaven shadow along his jaw made him seem older than he was. Yet what struck Daniel most was not Marcus's appearance. It was the way he instinctively glanced behind him before speaking, as if home itself had become something fragile. Daniel introduced himself simply. "I'm the attorney who met Naomi last night." Marcus's face changed instantly. Hope, fear, shame. They crossed it all in a single second. He stepped aside. "Please come in." The apartment was smaller than Daniel expected, and that itself said something. Every object in the room seemed chosen by necessity rather than preference. A second-hand couch, a folding table near the window, 2 children's backpacks hanging from a chair, prescription bottles lined neatly beside a chipped mug. On the couch, Evelyn Carter sat wrapped in a faded blanket, trying to look stronger than she was. Her dark skin had gone ashen beneath the undertones, and the silver threaded through her curls seemed brighter against the strain in her face. Even sitting still, she carried the quiet dignity Naomi had inherited. Years of surviving disappointment had made Evelyn gentle rather than bitter, but illness had begun stealing even the energy required to pretend. "You came about Naomi," Evelyn said softly. Daniel nodded. Marcus sank into the chair opposite him and covered his face briefly with one hand. That was when Daniel took out his phone. "I'd like to record this," he said, "only so Naomi can hear the truth from the people she loves." Marcus looked confused, but agreed. The recording began. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Daniel asked the question that mattered. "Has anyone from the hotel contacted you? Paid the medical debt? Offered work? Helped with the rent?" Marcus let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to breaking. "No." The word sat in the room like broken glass. He swallowed hard, then looked toward Evelyn and the children's bedroom door. "I think," his voice caught, "I think she did this for us." Daniel stayed silent, letting him continue. Marcus's eyes glistened. Naomi would never steal, but she would take the blame if someone convinced her it would save this family. The honesty in it shook even Daniel, though it only confirmed what he already believed. In the doorway to the bedroom, 6-year-old Liam Carter stood barefoot in striped pajamas, clutching a worn family photo in both hands. Liam had Naomi's thoughtful stillness, but unlike his little sister's innocence, his eyes already held the early seriousness children develop when they grow up around adult fear. He looked at Daniel with uncertainty, then at Marcus. "Is Mommy still at work?" Marcus nodded once, because he could not trust himself to speak. Liam tightened his hold on the photo. The image inside the cracked plastic frame showed the 4 of them smiling in front of Navy Pier the summer before Marcus lost his job. Naomi laughing, Ava on her shoulders, Liam holding cotton candy too big for his face. He had been carrying it all morning. Waiting. As Daniel prepared to leave, a sharp knock struck the apartment door. Marcus froze. When he opened it, Darnell Hayes stood in the hallway. The loan shark looked even more predatory in daylight. Thick gold chain, shaved head, expensive coat over a body gone soft from years of profiting off desperation rather than labor. His smile never reached his eyes. "You got my money?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "I need more time." Darnell's gaze drifted past him into the apartment, taking in the medicine bottles, the children, Evelyn's blanket. "That's what people always need." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tomorrow becomes double." Daniel memorized the face immediately. Threats, debt, pressure, the exact ecosystem that had made Naomi vulnerable. When he returned to headquarters, Daniel carried more than a video. He carried proof that every promise Claire Whitmore had made was a lie. Now, seated across from Naomi in the interview room, he unlocked his phone and placed it on the table between them. "You need to watch this." Naomi hesitated. Her pulse quickened before the screen even lit. The video began with Marcus opening the apartment door. As Naomi watched, her face softened at the sight of home. The cramped room, Evelyn's blanket, Liam in the background. For one fragile second, relief flickered through her. Then Daniel's recorded question came. "Has anyone helped?" Marcus's answer followed. No, Naomi went still. The color slowly drained from her face as the rest unfolded. Her mother had not been treated. Marcus still had no job, the rent remained unpaid. A creditor was now threatening them. Then came Marcus's trembling voice. "I think she did this for us." Something inside Naomi shattered. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The room blurred as tears flooded her vision before she even realized they were there. For the first time since her arrest, Naomi cried. Not the restrained tears of fear she had hidden in silence. This was grief. Raw, collapsing, helpless grief for the lie she had wrapped around herself and called sacrifice. Claire had never intended to save them. She had only needed Naomi to believe it long enough to become useful. Naomi covered her mouth with one hand as the sob finally broke free. Daniel did not interrupt. He let the truth do what interrogation never could. Across the city, Victoria Sterling stood before a line of microphones outside the Grand Crescent. Pale blue coat buttoned against the wind, camera flashes bursting around her. Her publicist had begged her to stay neutral. Instead, Victoria said clearly, "I'm no longer convinced the hotel's internal narrative reflects the truth." The words detonated across every news channel in Chicago. Inside the hotel, Mia Reynolds watched the live clip from behind the reception desk, guilt tightening deeper with every second. She had seen Claire on the VIP floor. She had seen Claire whispering to Naomi, and still she had said nothing. The silence was starting to feel like participation. Back in the interview room, Naomi wiped at her face with trembling fingers, but the tears would not stop. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "She chose you because she knew love would make you easier to control." Naomi stared at the dark screen of the phone where Liam still stood frozen in the paused frame, holding the family photo. Her family had remained exactly where she left them, only worse. She inhaled shakily, then something changed. The grief remained, but beneath it another feeling rose for the first time. Anger, not loud, not wild, cold and clarifying. "She lied to me," Naomi whispered. Daniel nodded. Naomi looked up, her eyes red, but steadier now. This time when she spoke, the fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. "I want to fight!" Daniel held her gaze and gave a single, quiet nod. In that room, beneath fluorescent lights and the weight of betrayal, Naomi Carter made the first real choice of the case. Not to survive, to stand. And Daniel, remembering his own mother's ruined life, made a silent promise that this would become more than a defense. It would become the case that forced Chicago to confront how easily race, poverty, and power still built false guilt around the most vulnerable. The video had broken Naomi's heart, but in doing so, it had finally freed her from the trap Claire built around it. Chicago moved under a hard slate sky the morning Naomi Carter decided to fight. The city outside police headquarters looked sharp and unforgiving, every glass tower reflecting the same cold light that now lived inside the case itself. For Daniel Brooks, the shift was immediate. Until now, he had been working on instinct, pattern recognition, and the memory of what false accusations had done to his own mother. But once Naomi finally agreed to stand for the truth, instinct became strategy. Daniel left headquarters just after dawn with a legal pad tucked beneath his arm and a list of names already forming in his mind. Claire Whitmore, security, VIP access logs, the missing corridor footage, the false confession. Every polished surface of the Grand Crescent now looked less like luxury and more like architecture built to hide intent. His first quiet stop was not the hotel. It was the hospital. Evelyn Carter had been admitted overnight after severe chest pain worsened into a cardiac episode. The emergency room at St. Mary's South was crowded with the familiar choreography of urgency. Rolling carts, clipped voices, fluorescent fatigue. Daniel found Marcus Carter seated in a hard plastic chair outside the observation ward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. Marcus looked up when Daniel approached. The exhaustion in him had gone deeper than sleeplessness. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw shadowed, and fear had stripped away the last traces of the defeated silence he had been carrying since Naomi's arrest. In its place was something Daniel had been waiting to see: resolve. "How is she?" Daniel asked. Marcus exhaled slowly. "They stabilized her, but they need to run more tests. Stress made everything worse." Daniel nodded, then sat beside him. For the first time since this began, Marcus spoke before being asked, "What do you need from me?" The shift mattered. A husband who had spent the last few chapters reacting to disaster was now choosing action. Daniel handed him a notepad page. "I need every detail Naomi ever mentioned about management, security staff, and the event schedule. Anything unusual. Anyone who seemed too interested in her finances. Anyone who knew your situation." Marcus took the page and nodded immediately. "I'll help." At the Grand Crescent Hotel, Mia Reynolds stood in the employee break room staring at the coffee machine without seeing it. The screen, mounted in the corner, was replaying Victoria Sterling's public statement from the previous evening. "I believe Naomi Carter may be innocent." The words had shifted public conversation overnight. What had once been media certainty was now media doubt. Mia's hands trembled around the paper cup she wasn't drinking from. At 26, Mia had spent years building a career by being observant but professionally invisible. She had learned early in hospitality that people in power noticed staff most when staff became inconvenient. Silence had protected her through layoffs, toxic managers, and guest scandals. But now, silence was becoming its own kind of guilt. When Daniel arrived through the service entrance later that morning, she was already waiting. They met in an unused banquet office overlooking the river. Mia looked smaller than usual, without the polished confidence of the reception desk. Her auburn hair was pulled back hastily, and the sharp alertness in her hazel eyes had been replaced by sleepless tension. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted. Daniel said nothing, letting the quiet make room for truth. Mia swallowed hard. The night Claire met Naomi in the surveillance office, "I saw them through the door glass." Claire leaned in close. Naomi looked terrified. Then I saw Claire hand her paperwork. Daniel's expression sharpened. "You're certain?" Mia nodded. She wasn't comforting her, she was pressing her. The words landed exactly where Daniel expected. Not proof, but pressure on the right seam. He wrote everything down carefully. Before leaving, he asked one more question. "Why speak now?" Mia looked toward the river through the window, her reflection faint in the glass, because every time they replay Naomi's face on TV, I keep seeing the moment I could have stopped this. At noon, Victoria Sterling held a formal press conference outside the hotel. The cold wind moved through her blonde hair as she stood beneath a line of microphones. Pale blue coat buttoned high at the collar, her posture perfectly composed. But unlike the poised celebrity from brand campaigns, today Victoria spoke with something rarer, moral clarity. I no longer accept the conclusion that Naomi Carter acted alone or at all, she said firmly. The speed of this accusation serves convenience, not truth. The statement detonated across every news outlet in Chicago. Public sympathy began to shift. Back at Aurelia Diamond's headquarters, Ethan Cole sat alone in a glass-walled conference room reviewing insurance files that had been forwarded after Victoria's comments escalated the internal audit. At first, the irregularities seemed technical. Premium clauses, event rider amendments, emergency loss acceleration language, then one figure stopped him cold. The Diamond Set's insurance payout structure had been quietly increased 48 hours before the event. Only a small group had access to request such a modification. One of them was the company's logistics liaison for the Chicago launch, Martin Voss. Martin was a pale, narrow-faced man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the emotionally flat demeanor of career administrators who survive by never becoming memorable. He handled shipment protocols, valuation transfers, and exhibition chain-of-custody paperwork. Exactly the kind of man who disappeared inside systems. Ethan's stomach tightened. This was no ordinary theft. Someone inside Aurelia had financially prepared for the loss. Late that afternoon, Daniel returned to his office, a quiet corner suite above a civil rights nonprofit downtown. The room was lined with case files, legal texts, and framed newspaper clippings from past wrongful conviction wins. Rain tapped softly against the windows. His assistant, Nora Bell, was waiting beside his desk. Nora was a black woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes, short, natural curls, and a disciplined legal mind that missed very little. Years of working alongside Daniel had made her precise, skeptical, and unafraid of ugly truths. "There's something you need to hear," she said. She turned the monitor toward him. An anonymous email had arrived from an encrypted address. No greeting, no explanation. Only a single audio file attached. Daniel clicked play. At first, all he heard was background static and the faint hum of ventilation. Then Claire Whitmore's voice emerged. Calm, controlled, unmistakable. The original goes into the biometric case. The replica goes on stage by the time Cole notices Naomi's already the story. A male voice answered. Daniel didn't recognize it immediately. "And the housekeeping girl?" Claire's reply came without hesitation. "She'll sign. People like her always choose family over freedom." Daniel's jaw tightened. The recording continued. Another voice, rougher, likely security. "Our men in technician uniforms have the ballroom route. 15-minute blind spot exactly as scheduled." Then a fourth voice. Voss confirmed Aurelia's insurance adjustment. Daniel sat perfectly still as the entire architecture of the crime unfolded through sound. The fake necklace, the camera blackout, the planted confession, the insurance angle. Truth had arrived not as suspicion, but as evidence. And it was explosive. He replayed the file twice, isolating the voices. Claire Whitmore, the head of hotel security, 2 fake technicians, someone inside Aurelia, almost certainly Martin Voss. The entire theft ring had been sitting inside the institutions the public trusted most. Luxury management, security, brand prestige. And at the center of it all, Naomi Carter had been selected not because she was guilty, but because she was poor, black, and loved her family enough to be manipulated. Daniel immediately called Marcus. "Meet me at the office," he said. When Marcus arrived 40 minutes later, he looked exhausted from the hospital. But the moment Daniel played the recording, every trace of helplessness vanished from his face. His hands clenched into fists. She knew exactly what she was doing. Daniel nodded once. Marcus looked toward the city lights outside the window, then back at the legal files stacked across the desk. What happens now? Daniel leaned back slowly, the audio file still open on screen. Now the truth stops being private. At that same moment, in her hospital room, Evelyn Carter lay connected to a monitor that beeped softly in the dim light. The urgency of her condition tightened the timeline around everything. Daniel understood what that meant better than anyone. Every hour Naomi remained locked inside this false story increased the damage to her family. The case was no longer simply about innocence. It had become a race against systems, headlines, and time itself. By the end of the evening, Daniel's board held the entire conspiracy in clean lines. Claire Whitmore, head of security. Graham Pike, a thick-set former private military contractor with a shaved head and a history of disciplinary transfers. 2 impersonating technicians using forged contractor credentials, Martin Voss from Aurelia's logistics division, the whisper, the confession, the recording, the truth. The entire theft ring had finally taken shape, and for the first time since Naomi signed that lie, Daniel Brooks was no longer chasing shadows. He was holding the architecture of the crime in his hands. Chicago's skyline glowed beneath a clear night sky as the Grand Crescent Hotel prepared for something no guest, reporter, or executive had expected when this nightmare began: a full reconstruction of the diamond theft. The ballroom that had once served as the stage for glamour was transformed into a controlled legal theater. Police officers in dark jackets lined the perimeter. Detectives coordinated with forensic teams, and cameras from every major news outlet in the city crowded behind designated press barriers. The same marble floors that had reflected wealth now reflected consequence. Naomi Carter was brought back into the hotel through the main entrance, but this time she was not escorted in shame. She walked beside Daniel Brooks. Though the fatigue of the past days still lingered in her posture, something fundamental had changed in the way she carried herself. The young black woman who once lowered her eyes beneath accusation now walked with her chin slightly lifted, not out of pride, but out of reclaimed dignity. Her deep brown eyes still held traces of the pain she had survived, yet they were steady now. The fear that once made her vulnerable had been replaced by something quieter and stronger. Truth. Daniel moved beside her with the calm confidence of a man who had spent his life waiting for moments like this. Not for victory itself, but for the instant when a system built on convenience was finally forced to confront evidence. His dark, tailored coat moved with him as he guided Naomi toward the ballroom entrance where Detective Ross and Lieutenant Helen Pierce were already waiting. Helen's expression had changed too. The same woman whose sharp green eyes once pressed Naomi for accomplices now carried the sober restraint of someone confronting how close the department had come to protecting a lie. Inside, the reconstruction began. The ballroom had been reset to mirror the original launch event. The velvet pedestal, the transparent security dome, the press risers, the exact stage lighting angles. Officers had recreated the technician route, the VIP elevator timing, and the 15-minute camera blackout. Every lie Claire's team built was about to be forced into daylight. Claire Whitmore arrived minutes later, summoned under the formal pretense of assisting the reconstruction. She entered wearing a navy suit sharp enough to pass for confidence, her ash-blonde hair still pinned into the flawless knot that had long served as part of her armor. But Daniel noticed the smallest fracture immediately. The pause in her stride when she saw Naomi standing free beside the police. For the first time, Claire looked uncertain. Behind her came Graham Pike, the hotel's head of security, a thick-set white man in his 50s with a shaved head, scarred knuckles, and the stiff posture of a former private military contractor who had mistaken intimidation for professionalism his entire life. 2 men in contractor uniforms followed, both now identified through forged credential records as outside imposters. Martin Voss from Aurelia's logistics division was escorted in separately, his pale face already drained of color behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The trap had reversed. Daniel stepped toward the center of the ballroom and handed Detective Ross the audio file transcript, access logs, and insurance fraud documentation Ethan Cole had finalized that morning. Ross gave the signal. The first arrest came fast. Graham Pike lunged toward the side exit, but officers intercepted him before he made it 3 steps. The fake technicians froze in place. Martin Voss visibly collapsed inward, shoulders caving under the weight of exposure before the cuffs even clicked around his wrists. Claire alone stood still. Too still. Her pale face remained composed, but her gray-blue eyes moved once toward Naomi, measuring what had changed. Daniel answered the look before she could speak. She chose courage after you chose convenience. That was the final fracture. Claire's mask broke not into panic, but into bitterness. You needed someone believable, Daniel continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom and into every microphone angled toward the scene. A poor black housekeeper with debt, a sick mother, and children to protect. The cameras caught everything. Claire said nothing as Detective Ross stepped forward and read the charges. Conspiracy, grand theft, insurance fraud, coercion, obstruction of justice. The cuffs closed around her wrists beneath the same chandelier light she had once controlled. And just like that, the architecture of false guilt collapsed. Outside the ballroom, word spread through the press corridor in seconds. The woman they had spent days calling a symbol of greed was innocent. The real criminals had been the polished faces behind management, security, and luxury branding. By the time Naomi stepped into the lobby, hundreds of cameras had turned toward her. But this time the energy had changed completely. No accusation, no cruelty. Only silence. Then a wave of flashes carrying something closer to awe. Victoria Sterling emerged from the elevator in a white coat over a silver dress, every inch the public figure the city recognized. Yet tonight, there was something deeply human in the way she crossed the lobby without hesitation. She walked directly to Naomi. Then, in front of every camera, she embraced her. The moment held the room still. Victoria's voice was clear, steady, and impossible to misquote. The world judged the wrong woman. The sentence moved through the crowd like absolution. Social media, news channels, and public sentiment pivoted with astonishing speed. Where Naomi's face had once represented suspicion, it now became the image of resilience. Injustice survived, and dignity reclaimed. Commentators who once called her desperate now called her brave. Editorials turned the case into a national conversation about race, poverty, and institutional scapegoating. By the next day, the city itself responded. Mayor Caroline Hughes, a poised black woman in her late 40s known for blending political sharpness with genuine civic empathy, held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Her tailored burgundy coat moved in the lake wind as she announced a full support package for the Carter family. Chicago would cover Evelyn Carter's medical debt in full. A scholarship fund would be established for Liam and Ava. Emergency housing assistance would stabilize the family's apartment and provide long-term security. The city's language was official. Its meaning was deeply personal. For the first time since this began, Naomi's sacrifice had been answered not by betrayal, but by justice. At the Grand Crescent, the board moved quickly to repair both damage and conscience. Mia Reynolds, whose testimony became one of the first cracks in Claire's story, was promoted to front office director. The nervous receptionist who had once survived by silence now stood as proof that courage could redirect institutions. Naomi received an offer no one in her position would have imagined only a week earlier. Guest Relations Supervisor. A role built not around invisibility but trust. The irony was not lost on her. The hotel that once used her silence as evidence was now placing its reputation in the hands of her voice. Marcus, too, found his own turning point. Through Daniel's connections and Detective Ross's recommendation, he was hired by a respected private security company contracted by several downtown properties. His broad shoulders seemed lighter the day he came home in his new jacket. Dignity restored not by charity but by earned opportunity. At St. Mary's South, Evelyn Carter survived surgery and began recovering slowly. Her smile fragile but real when Naomi visited with flowers and the children. Liam no longer clutched the family photo like a lifeline. Now it sat framed on the apartment shelf beside Ava's school drawings. Weeks later, Victoria Sterling announced the Naomi Carter Initiative, a workplace justice campaign focused on racial bias, class-based profiling, and the silent coercion often hidden inside luxury institutions. What began as scandal became reform. That night, long after the city's headlines had settled, Naomi stood on the rooftop terrace of the Grand Crescent. Chicago stretched before her in rivers of gold and white light, the skyline glowing against the dark velvet sky. The cold wind moved gently through her hair as she looked down at the streets that had once watched her fall and now seemed to witness her standing again. Marcus stepped beside her and took her hand. No words were needed. A small velvet box rested in Naomi's palm. Victoria's gift. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, simple and elegant, engraved with the words, "Truth shines longer than diamonds." Naomi traced the letters with her thumb, tears rising again. But these were not the tears of betrayal. They were the tears that come when pain finally becomes meaning. She looked over the city, over the hotel, over the life that had nearly been stolen from her, and she understood something deeper than relief. Nothing had saved her except what had been inside her from the beginning. Her honesty, her courage, and the stubborn, dangerous belief that even in systems built to crush the powerless, justice could still exist if enough people refused to abandon it. The lights of Chicago shimmered below like stars scattered across the earth. This time, Naomi did not feel invisible. She felt seen. And for the first time in a long time, the future no longer looked like something to survive. It looked like something to walk toward. This story reminds us that in everyday life, truth is not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes the most honest people are the easiest to blame simply because they are quiet, poor, different, or standing alone. Naomi's journey teaches us a gentle but powerful lesson. Never judge a person only by appearances, social status, or the story others tell about them. In our daily lives, we may not face a diamond theft, but we do face moments when someone is misunderstood, ignored, or unfairly blamed at work, in school, or even within our own families. The way we choose to respond in those moments defines our character. This story also carries an educational message about integrity, courage, and the responsibility we all share to speak up when something feels wrong. Silence can protect injustice, but one honest voice can begin to heal an entire system. Let Naomi's courage remind us to defend the truth, show compassion to those who seem powerless, and never allow prejudice or discrimination to decide someone's worth. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that truth still matters. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from today. And if you believe that honesty and courage can still change lives, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, justice, and the strength to stand for what is right. And if you believe stories like this can inspire kindness and faith in everyday life, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that change lives.